and so do many right here in our own community. My name is Michael Davis, and I'm an Intro to Communication student here at UALR. Today I'm going to talk to you about my service learning. I will talk to you about the AACF and their mission and what I did there, the communication principle and 2 concepts that I observed while I was doing my service learning, and recommendations for myself to improve my communication. All right, moving on, I completed my service learning at the AACF Soup Sunday event. How many of you have ever heard of the AACF? All right, the AACF stands for the Arkansas Advocates for Children and Families. And their mission is, ensure that all children and their families have the resources and opportunities to lead healthy and productive lives to realize their full potential. Now, what I did there was I watched a silent auction table, which was extremely boring. I was going there under the idea that I was actually going to maybe get to serve some of the soup and interact with the children a little bit more. No, I got to stand around and watch a lot of people have fun drinking alcohol and eat great food and then bid incorrectly on many different items. It was a real fun. I'm going to talk about that later. That was real fun. So I feel like while I wasn't out there making the money for them, I was just making sure that people were bidding correctly. However, my service did benefit the organization by I took care of a lot of the grunt work that they could then have the people who are more familiar with the organization do everything else. All right, moving on to my first main point, my communication principle and 2 concepts. The communication principle that I chose is communication is inevitable. According to the UALR Survival Guide, the definition is that this is the you cannot not communicate. During my service, I've never been there before, so I really tried to kind of stay away from people so that way I didn't have to answer all these questions. I didn't know what the answers were, and I didn't want to give them the wrong information. And by doing that, I ended up actually communicating to them that I didn't want to communicate, or maybe I just, was in a bad mood or anything like that. So I was still communicating to them. The first concept is listening and hearing are the same thing. According to the textbook by Adler, Rodman, and Dupree, they say hearing is knowing that there is a sound, and listening is being able to understand the sound, essentially. So this is what I was talking about earlier, people incorrectly betting. There were several times the same people would come up to me and ask me why I marked their names out, because there was a minimum raise amount. So you could either raise like 25 or 15. It was supposed to be in equal increments. They wanted to keep it as equal as possible. And some of the items were worth it, some of them weren't, but that's a different story. So I would sit there and tell people, like one person would ask, and I tried to say it loud enough for other people to hear me. That way I didn't have to repeat it several times. But yeah, that was nice while it lasted for about 1 second, and then I had to continuously tell people the rules, even though I knew they heard me. They acknowledged that they heard me. They're like, okay, yeah, no, it's fine. It's because there was alcohol involved, I'm sure. That's why a lot of them didn't actually listen. All right, and then the second concept is socioeconomic differences. According to Adler, Rodman, and Dupree, social class has a large impact on the people we communicate and how we communicate. People tend to be more comfortable with people of their own social class. I noticed that there were some distinct groups, like just looking around. It was kind of hard to see from having to walk around the tables and keep focused on the tables, but I was able to see that certain groups hung out together, like people that had all kinds of jewelry, nice fancy jewelry and clothes, they hung out together. And then people who weren't as nicely dressed, or like they were still dressed up, but not as nice, you could tell, they hung together. And there wasn't a lot of cross-communication going on there. Now on to my last point, the recommendations that I have for myself. Now, no one is perfect. We all have room to improve, and there's a communication concept and an ethical implication that I believe would really help myself and the community. The communication concept that I chose is co-culture communication. According to Adler, Rodman, and Dupree, it's the ability to communicate with different groups of people. Now, I chose this because I saw, the distinction. You could tell that the groups were sticking together, and I myself am not of the higher class, so it felt a little bit weird when I was trying to communicate with them and then they'd kind of ignore me a little bit. That was fun. That was real fun. So being able to communicate with them and everyone and be able to use the proper analogies or just anything that can help them understand what I'm trying to say is definitely important. And then the ethical implication I chose was restraint. Like I said, people would ignore me, and then I'd have to repeat myself all the time. So that was not fun, and I knew I was getting irritated, and I was letting that show too much. And as just a worker, I guess people kind of expect you to not get irritated, or they just don't care, really. So I just had to make sure that I have to make sure next time that I don't show as much irritation, so that way I don't end up ruining somebody's event. Let's see, and finally, I told you about my service learning. I explained what the AACF is and their mission, and the communication concepts and principles that I observed there, and then the recommendations for myself. And thanks to organizations like the AACF, children and their families have more representation, and they have somebody there to help.